I didn't expect that one. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. If you can notice, I was kind of the new uh, stream, countdown clock. I didn't expect to have a little bit of surprise at the end. Sounds like my alarm clock in the morning, but I appreciate everybody coming on. I know it's been kind of a couple weeks since we had our last stream, but and then we've been also interacting lately a lot with you guys through our newsletter. We had updated our latest newsletter system, so instead of just getting the request button, you actually can go in and check the OM out. And then what that did actually prompted a lot of questions because that pretty much doubled our response rate. And people have been asking about, hey, what does it cost as far as financing? Always kind of got a little questions. We also add one of our mortgage lender referral partners on the bottom in hopes that you can kind of get some of your questions answered and then hopefully be able to kind of get you closer to landing a good deal. So today I was had the chance to get Dave Semmer on the call, and we won't keep him that long, but we're appreciative of for him taking the time. I think I think he got the link in here, so I think that he's on here right now. Dave, are you on there?
I am.
Oh, great! I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no problem. Good to see you, Dwayne.
Awesome. So yeah, we just as far as kind of the viewers, we've kind of for our list, like I kind of mentioned, we got a lot of people kind of asking about financing questions. Either they're preparing to do a 1031 and then do a replacement into the new one, as well as kind of lining up any other deals. I know they kind of range from several hundred thousand to several millions as far as different capital available. So I wanted to kind of bridge the gap there. I know that there's been some movement as far as like interest rate, the treasury, and things like that. I have a little bit of an agenda as far as kind of what I was going to kind of go through. But if you don't mind, Dave, I know kind of from your perspective, would you be able to kind of give us kind of a top level of what you've been seeing as far as the financing world and, as far as like stuff that we can kind of share with the viewers?
Yeah, sure. No problem. Yeah, what we're seeing in the financing side, and the big focus the last week or two have been on the rates and what the Fed was going to do or not do. Hey, there I am. And interesting, about a month or so, it's 5 weeks ago, the Fed came out and was hinting at a potential rate cut in September. And what we saw immediately thereafter was the markets responded, and we saw Treasury bills, the Treasury rates slip or drop about 25, 30 basis points after he made that announcement back in August. So that was the market reacting immediately to the pending potential future rate cut in September. And sure enough, this week he cut rates, and you would think rates would continue to go down. At least the treasuries would continue to go down. But what we actually have seen in the last few days is actually rates creeping up. So I want to say rates came down about 25, 30 basis points back in August on the news or the rumor that he was going to cut rates. And then since cutting rates, we've seen him give a little bit of that back, anywhere from 8 to 15 basis points, depending upon the term treasury. And again, the perception is that the market had priced in that the September rate cut already back in August. So when the cut did actually occur this week, it was as expected, and we actually saw treasuries give back a little bit. Today we're still about 15, 16 basis points lower than where we were in August a month ago. But again, it's the encouraging news that I took out of the Fed meeting was the likelihood of 2 additional rate cuts before the end of the year. So all this, this 10 basis points give back in rates this week after the Fed made their announcement. I think long term or short term, I guess, and then over the next couple of months, I expect we're going to see rates to come down in anticipation of these future rate cuts. Like I said, I think the movement upward this week was more or less guys or taking profits or investors taking profits and selling their treasury positions, causing the prices to drop and the rate and the yields to go up. And but again, my short term prediction is that with the anticipation of 2 additional cuts, we're going to see treasuries come down. How much over the next 60 days will 90 days will remain to be seen, but I think it's looking good for rates. What we're seeing on the financing side, rates will vary anywhere from the high fives, 5.75 to 6.25 kind of range, and that depends upon it's deal specific. It depends upon the tenant, the location, the lease term, and then the economics or the underwriting of the deal itself. But that's kind of the general high level range, 5.75 to 6.25, depending upon who the credit is, who the tenant is, and the length of that lease term.
Right. Okay. And I mean, you had mentioned kind of short term, long term. I mean, folks that we're kind of dealing with, they're a little bit more, I would say, more longer term thinking. So obviously they're kind of planning. Should any investor, I mean, obviously, rates, as far as where you landed, ultimately does, affect your cash flow. But we're always kind of talking on our end is kind of we're, thinking longer term basis as far as, you're holding it long term. This is, these type of people that are buying net lease, they're, different type than say a value add multifamily or mobile home park investor where they have kind of a shorter business plan. Is the clients that you're speaking with, are they still hypersensitive as far as waiting for the movement in the market, or they're still kind of going with the same plan of long-term thinking? They're going to be putting a high amount down anyway, and kind of penciling it in upfront from there, or are they more kind of staying on the sidelines, kind of seeing what's going to happen before they even make a move?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple schools of thought, and in every investor is a little different in that regard, Dwayne, as to their hold period and their horizon is an attitude towards how long are they gonna own it. While majority of my borrowers, my clients, have that long term hold horizon, there are others that temporarily or short term want to place their funds, or they may be in a 1031 exchange and place their funds into a shorter term deal that they can pivot out of or flip if after a rent increase, or if interest rates drop and cap rates drop proportionally, there might be some value add there that they would look to get out of the deal at that point. So everybody's a little different. And I think it just depends individually, what the individual hold period is as to, because there's other things that sort of factor in, this accelerated depreciation that some folks are starting to use a lot. So that has a shorter life than somebody, 20 years ago that, had the mentality, hey, I'm going to buy this, I'm going to put it in my trust, and my grandkids are going to own it. So it just depends, and the financing also depends. What I ultimately find for my clients or look for my clients is ultimately depends upon their hold period. If they see themselves in this asset or in the investment for a long period, then I could bring them longer term fixed rate options versus shorter term. To answer your question, as far as our who's jumping in and who's still sitting on the fence, that's also very borrower specific. Certain guys need, have certain requirements on their investments, as far as yields, return on their investment, et cetera. And sometimes, the financing, the mortgage is the biggest expense on the property, right? So if, a 25 or a 50 basis point reduction in interest rate could result in, or, translate into, hundreds of thousands of loan proceeds. And some guys need those additional proceeds to make the deal make sense. And other guys are, don't have that luxury, or they need to, they're under a shorter time frame because of it's a 1031 exchange or something. So it's really different. What the good news is when we see rates drop, what eventually follows, and it's a lag factor, but we'll eventually see, if rates drop and they hold, we'll see downward pressure on cap rates, which is upward pressure on value. And so, the play is, if you could time it right, where you catch the rate drop, but before the cap rate compression, that's more upside for the buyer, in that type of environment. So it's sort of trying to peg the market at the downward swing before things, start to ramp up like we saw, post-COVID. Post-COVID, we saw rates drop. Rates were in the threes, and it was crazy, right? I mean, it pushed cap rates way lower than anybody ever anticipated. And and what we've given back over the last couple of years has been due to the higher interest rates and that cap rates going up and values going up, or down, pardon me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one kind of frequently asked question, and I always had probably ask you again, and I'm pretty sure you've got this quite frequently as well, because a lot of the investors we work with, very, I say high leverage as far as like cash position. So when they're now looking into the financing, they're always asking, what is, especially for the net lease stuff, what are the ranges where out of the banks that you're looking at, as far as minimal or optimal down payment? It seemed kind of like a kind of basic level question, but I get it quite frequently. So I don't know if there's a rule of thumb on it that we can at least kind of disseminate for people can kind of have an idea as far as where those are, because now we're also trying to give them some higher level. This is kind of where this deal would take to kind of get this thing started. I know you kind of talked about 35%. Is that still the case that you're looking at?
It's today. It's not so much a loan to value driven metric. It's lenders are looking at what we call debt coverage ratio. And again, this is sort of an underwriting practice that evolved and came about when cap rates were in the fours and fives, right, on some of these assets. You can't sit there and say we're going to give you a 65% loan on a 4 cap investment, right? Because there's just not enough cash flow to service the debt. So the lenders are looking at 100% the cash flow from that, that's bound under that investment, dictated by the lease or predicated by the lease. And so we're underwriting that cash flow. And today we're using, we use what we call it's a debt coverage ratio is what most lenders use. And that debt coverage ratio, it's a simple formula. It's your net operating income divided by your annual debt service. And that ratio needs to be anywhere from 125 to 130 at the low end. And I have other lenders, that are more conservative, but they'd like to see a higher debt coverage ratio. So what that tells us, and if we know where interest rates are, we know what the cash flow is, we can back into a loan amount based on that cash flow. I think a rule of thumb, if you're looking at anything over a 6 cap, yeah, you're probably looking at 60%, 55-60% leverage, because lenders are gonna not just take the gross income, they're gonna take some other. They're going to build in some cushion on their underwriting, which includes a vacancy factor and maybe some reserves. Even though that's not indicative of what the true cash flow of the property looks like, that's not what your buyers are putting in the bank every month. It's just an added cushion the lender includes to give them a little bit of breathing room in the event whatever the rents come down, or there's a vacancy at the center, even though it's a single tenant net lease property, you're either fully or vacant. So that's kind of a silly argument to make, but yeah, it's on average, it's you're going to be, I'm guessing, probably closer to 40% down, and again, it's the higher the cap rate, the lower that down payment's going to require, right? So if you're buying something at a 6.5 cap, as an example, you're probably going to get closer to that 35% down number as opposed to 40. But again, it's kind of hard to put an LTV number on it when that's something that we've kind of gone away from the last few years in our underwriting.
Right. Yeah. Because I always say the 1.25 plus. So you said 125, 130 DS for your debt service coverage.
Right.
Yeah. That definitely makes sense. I know we had talked about. I know it's deal specific, but I always get questions as well. I'm just kind of going through some of the stuff that was sent prior. Was kind of typical time frame, as we have a lot of 1031 exchange investors, depending on kind of they want to. Obviously, everyone want to close as fast as they can, and it's kind of when the bank and when everything's ready, and when all the parties can get everything together. But as far as kind of best case scenario, is it still like a 45, 60-day type of turnaround if everything was all in place, reports done, buyer and seller all in agreement, and the heavens come down, everything work in conjunction. Is that kind of what you're kind of typically seeing?
Yeah, it's 60 days is probably the average start to finish time frame, right? And that's that doesn't count the week up front where you've got to source and identify and put the deal under application. But yes, 60 days is typically the standard time frame in the industry. We can speed that up to 45 days. And if you have reports in hand, we can even close as quickly as 30 days. So not to say, I mean, everything's got to be in, the borrowers has to be organized, and usually we have done that in the past for borrowers that have had deadlines approaching that, where we have to expedite it. But yeah, it's 30 days is sort of an outlier. It can happen. Again, it helps to have reports in. There's other ways around that, Dwaine. We can expedite the reports. That means you're paying a little extra for an appraisal or for the phase one, which are usually the two basic reports that are required for most deals. But you can expedite, right? You could get an appraisal turnaround in a couple of weeks, or a phase one turned around in a week or 10 days. And, it'll cost you a little extra, but, we certainly have vendors that can accommodate, a shorter time period if we had to.
Right. And then recently, because we've been working a lot of developers and new construction, I know we talked about that in the past on a couple select transactions, but as far as kind of lenders' view as far as new construction and kind of, I know it kind of gets kind of a little tough when you have the rent is scheduled to come in, and then you're waiting for a certificate of occupancy. Is there kind of any guidance as far as people buying new construction, or things to kind of prepare for? I know on our end, we're trying to, get the investor and the developer together as best as they can, as far as, whatever the lender needs. But is any advice you can give as far as people looking at new construction purchases?
Sure. Well, first off, new construction is going to have, a brand new lease term, which is ideal for pretty much every lender out there, right? They want to see as long a lease term as possible. But as far as what's neat, the requirements to fund, generally, most lenders are going to have these three requirements: in occupancy, open for business, and paying rent. That's usually the three things that a lender will look for. Now, if this is like a build to suit, or if the tenant's responsible for the construction, we can sometimes eliminate that open for business part of it, even if the lease is commenced. The big one, I guess, of the three is the commencement of the lease. Because once the lease commences, technically the tenant can't back out, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can't wiggle out, and that's the lender's biggest fears. Hey, if we fund this thing before they get open and the lease commences, well, what if, right? What if something happens and they don't finish construction and the tenant never opens and they walk away? Now the lender's funded a loan, and now it's there's no lease and there's no income, there's no cash flow coming in. But again, in the past, we have demonstrated in the past that if there's no landlord obligations as it relates to that lease, meaning the landlord turns the premise over, the tenant accepts it, the lease commences. Whether or not rent has commenced or not is another conversation. But as long as we can demonstrate that there's no landlord obligations, there's nothing that's going to step in the way of that tenant finishing construction and or opening for business, and or even if they were to walk away, we have a viable bondable lease that the lender can hang their hat on. We have in the past been able to fund prior to even the commencement of the rent, as long as that lease has commenced. But again, that's not it's a little different scenario, but yeah, that's generally speaking, those are the three criteria for a lender, unless we can demonstrate that tenant can't walk away from the deal.
Yeah, because especially like when because I was just thinking if we're working on another one where it's the ground lease, the landlord prepared everything, handed over all of they accepted the site, but then and of course it's in the best case scenario. I mean, the case for the tenant to finish the building and get them started, because now they're on the hook. They gotta finish up the store and open for business, start making money to pay rent. But there was kind of that period of now it's on the tenant to finish the building. So that's why I was kind of seeing where there was any draw line with the lender funding it, and or if there's had to wait till it's they're actually open and paying business. So it's kind of good that you can kind of see that there's some options there, because we definitely found out there's some issues when you're kind of dealing with kind of those waiting periods in between.
Yeah, there's certainly, and then there's another remedy. I mean, that maybe there's a holdback that the seller doesn't, the seller keeps funds in escrow until certain events occur, right? Whether it's actually opening for business or until that first rent check clears, right? So there's things that we could structure up front to again to give the buyer, in addition to the lender, that same security or comfort that, hey, this is this tenant's that they're not going to get stuck. Nobody's going to get stuck with a building with that's 90% complete with no tenant. So and I don't think any investor wants to kind of be in that predicament either, right? And they want to make sure that there's no obligations in. But the other there's other components to that. There's the mechanics liens and things like that maybe there are funds that need to be held back in escrow just to make sure that if even after they get the C of O, a subcontractor shows up and says, hey, I'm owed money for the parking lot or something, that there's money available, that's isn't going to be that the because it is now a lien, it's not going to become the responsibility of the buyer or the lender.
Right, that makes sense. And so another question that came in with regards to shorter term leases. So we're always talking 8, 10 plus years that we're typically pitching and selling to our clients. But I know that you've probably worked with a handful of those as well, but can you kind of give us some insight as far as funding shorter term leases and and if the difficulties in it, or or any advice on that?
Yeah, so I think every deal is financeable at some level. That's kind of been my my mentality since I got into this business 35 years ago. So, but for the most part, lenders, there's that vacancy risk at the end of the lease term that lenders are always cognizant of, in spite of the options, right? Because understanding, tenant option or lease options or renewal options are tenant options, they're not landlord options.
Right.
So yeah, the shorter term leases are very difficult to get financed. But like I said, it at some level they are financeable. So it's a function of if you're putting 50% down or 60% down or something like that. I mean, can you get a lender to finance a deal with 5 years left on the lease? Well, maybe, right? It just depends. Depends on a lot of factors. What do the rents look like in comparison to market? Can we demonstrate that the rents that they're currently paying are sustainable and that they're likely going to renew? Even though nobody knows what's going to happen. But yeah, 8 to 10 years is what lenders like to see, and it's that refinance risk is what lenders are looking at. They say, hey, listen, if we're going to write you a 5 or 7 year loan, there's got to be enough lease term on the back end of that when our loan matures that you can, if you don't refinance with us, that you can find another lender to write that loan. And if you have 3 years left to go on a lease, and you're not going to have as many lenders as getting excited about that deal or financing that deal because of that potential risk of the property being vacant. So longer the term, the better. And I know it's sometimes attractive to chase shorter term leases because the cap rates are much higher. It's a little better, but there is a fair amount of risk of that tenant renewing. Again, there's certain ways to mitigate it. Whether it's Placer AI stats or sales figures from the tenant or whatnot, we can sometimes get over that hurdle. If we could demonstrate that the tenant is likely going to renew.
Oh, nice. Yeah, and it kind of mentioned this. I was going to go on to the next question, but as far as with the lender in general, I know there's from regional and credit unions and insurance companies, but as far do they using now with the kind of the newer technology like Placer.ai, or outside of if there's no sales that's required on the lease? Because that's kind of sometimes a challenge where now it's like, okay, we want to make the best case, but then the store doesn't report sales, so therefore we've got to rely on the real estate itself, the tenant, the location, things of that nature. Are they also now using this type of data to make their decisions?
Yeah, and it certainly helps. Like I said, I mean, every lease, every deal, it has issues, right? There's, could be whatever, a term renewal, could be financials on the tenant, or for better or worse. But yeah, the more information that we have going in, it certainly helps the argument. It helps mitigate some of these potential risks that the lender or perceived risks that the lender may be trying to get comfortable with. And solid placer AI data, sales figures. Really, if we could see what the tenant is doing and we know what their occupancy cost is, there's ratios that we use to understand the likelihood of that tenant renewing their lease at the end of the term. And if you could demonstrate, generally speaking, on the on the occupancy cost, which is it's a function of their rents versus sales. If you're less than 7 or 8% on your occupancy costs, there's a strong probability that that tenant's going to renew. And that what that means, Dwayne, is that the rents are less than 8% of the revenue. And that seems to be the model that the lower the better, right? So the greater your sales, the greater your sales, the lower that ratio is going to be. And again, there's no guarantees in life, but it certainly points to the higher probability that that tenant's going to renew at the end of the lease term. And whatever tools that we have at our disposal, even if it's just comparison of market rents to the subject rents, but all these things kind of get thrown into the pot, and it can compel a lender to maybe move forward on a deal that that they may not normally would have quoted or financed.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So I know that we're kind of running close on the clock for Dave Simon. I'm hoping that we can have you on more often, especially as we start to see some changes in the marketplace and people kind of getting more closer to making their planned acquisitions. But another question I popped in is regards to recourse and non-recourse financing. Just kind of maybe just a higher level overview of it, and this, how that kind of plays into, because I know that some of the quotes you had sent back, some of them were recourse, some were non-recourse, and then I was wanting to see how, just to kind of explain for the viewers the process behind that and the pros and cons for it.
Yeah, sure. So recourse, for those listening, recourse is a personal guarantee. And recourse means something a little different in every state. Out here in California, recourse is nothing to be afraid of, to be honest. California is what we call a single action state. But the recourse laws vary from state to state. Texas, as an example, recourse has completely different meaning than it does out here in California. Generally speaking, most lenders are recourse lenders. In fact, there are very few. In fact, I know one or two type lenders for deals under $3 million. And I'm not sure why why there aren't more lenders under 3 million that offer non-recourse financing. I think it's just because nobody offers it. And, so why offer non-recourse if your competition isn't offering non-recourse? When you get to loan amounts over $3 million, that opens it up to the institutional lenders who understand real estate probably a little better than little credit unions. I'm talking about my life companies that I work with. I do have lots of non-recourse lenders within my life companies, but again, most of those non-recourse lenders start at like $3 million and up. So a lot of these smaller deals, these QSRs, these dollar stores, they tend to be smaller in size, and therefore you should expect to be personally guaranteeing or signing a recourse loan. There are non-recourse lenders in what we call CMBS, or commercial mortgage-backed security lines. But the problem is the CMBS lenders, those are the old conduits or mortgage-backed security lenders. The transaction costs for those deals are very high. And generally speaking, they don't like to do smaller transactions either. But recourse or non-recourse is available on these smaller deals, but again, there's just not a lot of options as it relates to the financing for non-recourse debt. In fact, your clients, your buyers should expect to sign recourse or be personally obligated for the indebtedness. What that means, you should talk to your attorney, because again, like I said, every state is different. And the recourse laws will vary from state to state.
Got it. Okay, yeah, because I know that's tends to come up, and like I said, that's good advice there. So, okay, perfect. So,
One follow up on that, I just want to add is you need to understand that on a recourse loan, I mean, yes, the lender's asking you to personally guarantee it, and that's what recourse means. But understand you're likely coming in, or your buyers are likely coming in with 35 to 55% down payment on these things. So theoretically, I mean, the recourse only comes into play in the event that the equity, the lender's equity, which is that 35 to 55% down payment, goes away, and that's at a point of foreclosure. So, we're only talking about in the event there's a loss where your buyers or borrowers, my borrowers, would have any exposure on that level, and so you would theoretically need to lose your equity before this even becomes a conversation with the lender. In other words, you make a $2 million loan on a building you bought for $3 million. Even if it goes into default, is the lender going to pursue you for that deficiency? Well, there's really no deficiency, because if you sold the asset, you sell for if you sell it for anything over $2 million, the lender's not going to take a loss.
right.
Yeah. So we're only talking about in the event of a loss and what the buyer borrower's exposure could be. And again, that's going to vary from state to state. But again, it's a remote. I listen, and it's as much as it is an emotional thing for a borrower or a buyer. It's also an additional level of security for the lender. The lender knows that, hey, we know that recourse may not mean all that much, but that borrower's putting a signature on the line saying that they're going to guarantee that indebtedness. It's like it's the captain abandoning ship. They're going to do anything and everything they can, to make sure that lender's made whole, right, before they let that deal go bad. And it's more of a psychological, I think, in a lot of cases, from a borrower's perspective, that they're not going to, hey, I guarantee this loan, I can't let it go bad. They're going to, so you're going to hang in there. You're going to keep making the payments. You're going to, do what you can to kind of right the ship before it goes under. And again, it's from a lender standpoint, it can be a psychological thing. As with the buyer, right? He doesn't want to be exposed personally to a potential lawsuit or loss if the deal goes bad. But again, it's just keep that in mind, that your that equity cushion between your loan amount and the purchase price or the value is you'd have to lose all that before this recourse ever really kind of becomes an issue or part of a meaningful conversation.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, definitely. So, but for anyone who have any additional questions, I mean, you can send it directly to us. I want to kind of bombard Dave too much, but you have his email there, dsemmer@psrs.com. Dave, is that your direct? Is that your office number, the 424 number? That's the best.
Yeah, that's my office line. My cell phone, if you need to get a hold of me, is 310-628-9697.
Perfect.
Hey,
And
Dave,
then next it's going to be. Go ahead, Quinn.
No, I was just going to say, I got a quick question before we let you go. I know, so for some of the new investors that are calling you, asking for pre-qualifying questions, could you just go over briefly, like, some of the questions you asked them, just so they're aware of it prior for them to call you?
Yeah, sure. So pre-qualification is sort of a three-legged stool, if you will. First one is a credit, right? Is the borrower should have clean credit. And when I say clean credit, we're talking a FICO score over 700, 750 preferably. That includes no bankruptcies, foreclosures, deed in lieu's, givebacks, anything like that. And so that's sort of the one leg of the stool. The second leg is your net worth. And generally speaking, lenders like to see the borrowers have a net worth equal to the loan amount. So if you're borrowing $1 million, they want to see a personal net worth of at least $1 million. And your net worth is your assets minus your liabilities. And then the third leg is your liquidity. They like to see post-closing liquidity, and this will vary from lender to lender, of anywhere from 10 to 20% of the loan amount, or it could be 6 to 9 months of mortgage payment. So let's say, for example, your mortgage payment's $15,000. That's roughly $90,000 of post-closing liquidity. And that is, the thought process there is they don't want somebody going all in on a deal and not having any liquid reserves in case something happens. And so yeah, those are generally speaking. So it's net worth equal to the loan amount or more, liquidity of anywhere from 10 to 20% of the loan amount. So again, if you're borrowing $1 million, they want to see about 100,000 in the bank, right? And that number goes up. And then credit. So those are the three legs to kind of pre-qualify somebody. At the end of the day, the real estate, the lease, that tenant is ultimately is what's paying that making that mortgage payment, or allowing the borrower to make that mortgage payment, right? The cash flow coming in from that rent. So we're going to look at the real estate first and foremost, the strength of that lease, the strength of that tenant first and foremost, and then we look at the borrower as sort of secondary collateral, if you will, or secondary form of repayment. And so again, the real estate's got to stand on its own, and then the borrower's got to be able to demonstrate those three items, those three things behind it.
All right, perfect. And we got, like I said, got your contact information in there. We do have a form that we're going to send out after the call, which is just kind of basics with this. I think it'll be like a good pre-engagement information for Dave if you wanted to kind of talk about any purchases or refinances. Because like I said, we have a lot of stuff that's going out and people are very interested. So we just want to kind of give you all the tools you need if there's something that you want to keep either buying all cash or financing, so we can make sure that we're kind of ahead of the game there. But yeah, Dave, I appreciate it again. I love to have you back on. Like I said, it's kind of a dynamic thing where, stuff is kind of constantly coming in. We get a lot of questions. So I said, I figure it's really easy just to kind of throw you on. We used to do this quite often, but we're kind of get right back into the live stream. It's been very helpful for our investor list. And we're posted this both on YouTube and our LinkedIn channels, that we have a kind of a significant amount of people on those networks. So appreciate it again, Dave, and look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dwayne. Thanks for the opportunity. And you know the drill, right? If you see something that piques your interest, send it over, and I can give you some quick feedback as to what the financing might look like for that particular deal. So
absolutely. All right. Thank you so much. All right. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Take care. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. So appreciate it, guys. We're going to soon be wrapping up. But I also wanted to quickly show on the screen what I have here was some of the latest stuff. And what we'll do is, because we don't have much time today, we'll probably just save it for next time. Was our, let me see here. Actually, we had sent that out on Monday, was our cap rate report. So we're going to kind of say, because we're about 42 minutes in, don't want to burn us up too much. Again, appreciate all of you guys coming on. And like I said, just send us your questions so we can, like I said, send as many things over. This call is for you guys, so I want to make sure that we provide as much value and get as much information out there to make it a little easier. Let me see, 1 second, Quinn. Let me just pull up here it is. Oh, actually, no, that's not it. It is here. So I gotta share my screen now. Share screen. Okay. This is a new tool that we just kind of finalized a short while ago, and it's for our clients that we've are constantly looking at multiple amount of opportunities. So if you are want us to kind of start engaging, start getting really active, we'll send you a copy of this sheet. This can hold about, I think, 10 properties on it, and we can, of course, expand it, but it allows us to visually see everything that we're working on. It will also include the link, and as we kind of scroll a little bit below, it'll have all of the stuff in regards to down payment. This is a great sheet to have when we're talking with Dave, so we can start running numbers, start playing around with some different scenarios, and start getting more kind of granular into the details, so we can kind of see which one will be a good fit for you. Because I know that, like I said, as we start sending out a lot more packages, I don't want to kind of overly confuse it with just a whole inbox of just properties, and it's kind of hard to make any sense of it. This I think will be particularly helpful for exchange investors where we're dealing with a shorter period of time, and you just have to analyze as many deals as possible, and try to kind of make sense of a good decision that we can do to make move forward. So if anyone wants to copy this sheet, just shoot us an email, dclark@American Net Lease or quinn@americannetlease.com, and then we'll just send over the link. And I guess just let us know your criteria. Just be on the lookout for our phone calls, and we'll just kind of start deep diving into what you're looking in, and start kind of going through some deep analysis. As you can see here in our my presentation, was what is key is knowing the criteria and then taking forward what is a good strategy. So, because as we know, everything takes time. If you're in a 1031 or we're looking at different multiple opportunities, it takes time to source good opportunities. We want to make sure that the criteria is set. That's what we're going to do on the first phase. And then it's going to take time to negotiate this thing as far as our LOI and our PSA, and then our due diligence, our financing, and our closing and collecting our rent. So again, look forward to kind of chatting with you guys soon. I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day and give us some feedback. Is this a good time? Should we do it earlier? Should we do it later in the afternoon? And like I said, we'll kind of play around the different times and see what works best for everyone. But look forward to chatting with you guys soon. Thanks, Quinn. Thanks, Dave, for jumping on. Again, look forward to chatting with you next week. All right, take care, guys.